Something important is happening in March that most people on Social Security, SSDI, and SSI are simply not prepared for, and the government isn't sending you a reminder letter. I've watched decades of financial policy move through Washington, and I'll tell you plainly, the confusion surrounding deposit dates, payment schedules, and stimulus distributions this March is not accidental. It's a system built with enough complexity to make the average recipient miss money that is rightfully theirs. Now, I'm not a man who believes in panic, but I do believe in preparation. The difference between a senior who collects every dollar owed to them in March and one who doesn't isn't luck. It's knowing the exact dates, the exact deposit order, and the exact rule changes that Social Security Administration quietly updated going into this new year. So sit down. This is the information Washington assumed you wouldn't find. Let me tell you something I learned a long time ago sitting in boardrooms with some of the smartest financial minds this country has ever produced. The people who lose money, not always because someone stole it from them, but because they simply didn't understand the timing of it. Timing in finance is not a small detail. It is everything. And when we're talking about Social Security, SSDI, and SSI payments in March of this year, timing is the single most important thing you need to understand right now. Because March 2025 is not a normal payment month. There are shifts happening, schedule adjustments being made, and if you're sitting at home waiting for a deposit on the wrong date, you're going to spend 3 or 4 days in unnecessary panic wondering where your money went. And I won't have that for you. So let's start from the beginning, and let's do it properly. The Social Security Administration pays its beneficiaries based on a schedule that most people only half understand. If you started receiving Social Security benefits before May 1997, or if you receive both Social Security and SSI simultaneously, your payment comes on the 3rd of every month. No exceptions, no variations. March 3rd is your date, and that money should be in your account or arriving in your mailbox right on schedule. Now, if that date falls on a weekend or a federal holiday, the payment gets moved to the business day before that date, not after. That's a critical distinction that the SSA does not always explain clearly, and it catches people off guard every single year. Now, for those of you who began receiving Social Security retirement, disability, or survivor benefits after May 1997, your payment is determined by your birthday, specifically the day of the month you were born. And here's where people get genuinely confused because it sounds more complicated than it actually is once someone walks you through it slowly and honestly. If your birthday falls on the 1st through the 10th of any month, your payment arrives on the 2nd Wednesday of March. If your birthday falls between the 11th and the 20th, your payment comes on the 3rd Wednesday of March. And if your birthday falls between the 21st and the 31st, then you are waiting until the 4th Wednesday of the month. In March of this year, that means 2nd Wednesday group receives their payment on March 12th, the 3rd Wednesday group gets paid on March 19th, and the 4th Wednesday group sees their deposit on March 26th. Write those dates down, put them in your phone. Tell your spouse, do not guess on this. Now let's talk about SSI, Supplemental Security Income, because SSI operates on an entirely different rhythm than Social Security Retirement or SSDI, and conflating the two is one of the most common mistakes I see people make. SSI is paid on the 1st of every month without exception to eligible low-income individuals who are aged, blind, or disabled. However, and this is where March becomes genuinely unusual, when the 1st of a month falls on a weekend or a holiday, SSI gets paid on the last business day of the preceding month. What that means practically for March is that some SSI recipients may have already seen their March payment arrive at the very end of February. If that happened to you, that was not a mistake. That was not an extra payment. That was simply the SSA moving your March deposit forward to comply with their own scheduling rules. I say this because every single time this happens, thousands of people either spend the money thinking it's a bonus or call their bank in a panic thinking something went wrong. Neither response is correct. Calm down, check the calendar, and recognize that the system is working exactly as designed. Now I want to spend a moment on SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, because the people receiving SSDI payments are often dealing with health challenges on top of financial stress. and the last thing they need is uncertainty about when their money is arriving. SSDI recipients follow the same birthday-based Wednesday schedule I described a moment ago, with one important caveat. If you were approved for SSDI and you also qualified for Medicare, your situation may involve certain deduction adjustments that affect the net amount you see deposited. The Medicare Part B premium, which increased this year, is deducted directly from Social Security and SSDI payments before they hit your account. For 2025, the standard Medicare Part B premium is $185 per month. If you weren't aware of that increase, now you are. That's not a bank error. That's not the government randomly taking your money. That's a scheduled deduction that went up, and you deserve to understand why your deposit looks slightly different than it did last year. And speaking of changes, let's address the broader landscape of what has shifted in Social Security policy entering this year, because there's been a lot of noise online and frankly a lot of misinformation being spread that I find deeply irresponsible. First, the cost of living adjustment, the COLA, for 2025 came in at 2.5%. Now, some people heard that number and felt disappointed, especially after the 8.7% adjustment back in 2023. But I want you to think about this carefully, rather than emotionally. A 2.5% COLA reflects a cooling inflation environment. It means the formula that the SSA uses, which is tied to the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners, determined that prices on average did not rise as sharply this year as they did in prior years. Whether that formula accurately represents your personal cost of living, particularly around healthcare and housing, is a legitimate debate. But the adjustment itself is not arbitrary. It follows a statutory formula, an understanding that helps you hold the right people accountable when you feel the adjustment falls short. Now there's something else I want to address directly, because it has caused an enormous amount of confusion, and I believe confusion is almost always more dangerous than bad news. There has been significant discussion about the Social Security Fairness Act, which was signed into law at the very end of 2024. This legislation eliminated two provisions, the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset, that had for decades reduced Social Security benefits for certain public sector workers, including teachers, firefighters, and police officers who received government pensions. If you or someone in your household worked in a public sector job and had your Social Security benefit reduced because of those provisions, you may be entitled to a higher monthly payment going forward and potentially retroactive payments covering back to January 2024. The SSA is processing these changes, and they have stated publicly that affected beneficiaries will receive letters explaining their updated benefit amounts. If you believe you qualify and have not yet received communication, my strong advice is to contact the SSA directly, either by phone at 1-800-772-1213 or by visiting your local Social Security office, rather than relying on third parties who may give you inaccurate information or, worse, try to charge you for assistance that is entirely free. Let me now spend a moment on the stimulus conversation, because I know it's in the title and I know it's on a lot of people's minds. I want to be straightforward with you the way I've always believed in being straightforward with people, regardless of whether the answer is what they were hoping to hear. As of right now, there is no federally approved fourth stimulus check that has been passed into law and scheduled for deposit in March 2025. What there is, and what has driven much of this conversation, is ongoing legislative discussion about targeted relief payments, discussions around energy rebates in certain states, and in some cases, state-level programs that function similarly to stimulus payments for low-income seniors and disabled residents. Alaska, for example, continues its permanent fund dividend program. Several states have introduced their own senior relief initiatives tied to property taxes or heating costs. If you live in California, Colorado, Illinois, or a number of other states, there may be state-specific relief available to you that doesn't make national headlines but absolutely puts real dollars in your pocket. Check your state's Department of Revenue or your state's Senior Services website for what's available where you live. I also want to say something to those of you who found this information through searching online, perhaps because someone you trust told you a stimulus check was coming and you wanted to confirm it. I understand the instinct. When you're living on a fixed income and the cost of groceries has gone up and your utility bills haven't come down the way the inflation headlines suggested they would, you are looking for relief. That's not foolishness. That's the practical reality of managing a household in retirement or on disability income in America today. But what I've always believed, what decades of watching markets and policy has reinforced in me, is that making decisions based on rumor is almost always more costly than waiting for verified fact. So verify. Use the SSA's official website, ssa.gov, call their number, speak to a real person at your local office. These resources exist for you, and they are free. What I want you to walk away from this understanding is that March is a month where your money is moving on a very specific schedule. Some of that schedule may have already begun at the end of February with SSI payments. Some of it will unfold across the 3 Wednesday payment dates, and some of the bigger policy changes, particularly around the Fairness Act, are still being processed and implemented by an agency that is working through a significant administrative undertaking. Patience is warranted. Vigilance is also warranted. And most importantly, your ability to understand this system clearly, without panic, without misinformation, without someone taking advantage of your confusion, is something I believe you are entirely capable of. You've managed harder things than a payment schedule. Stay informed, stay calm, and make sure every dollar that belongs to you finds its way to you.